Deep in the heart of Montana's wilderness, where ancient pines touched the sky and silence held secrets, Forest Ranger Mark Stevens faced a moment that would forever change his understanding of the wild. The morning had started like any other in his 15 years of service, but nature had a way of turning ordinary days into extraordinary tales. The crisp autumn air carried more than just the scent of pine needles that morning. A distressed call, unlike anything Mark had heard before, echoed through the forest. The sound pulled at something deep within him, a mixture of raw pain and desperation that made his skin prickle. As an experienced ranger who had encountered everything from injured elk to displaced wolf cubs, Mark knew this was different. Following the sound through the dense undergrowth, his boots crushing fallen leaves beneath them, Mark reached the edge of what appeared to be an abandoned mining pit. The sight below made his breath catch in his throat. There, trapped in the darkness of the forgotten pit, lay a massive grizzly bear. Her fur, usually a magnificent brown, was matted with mud and blood. But what struck Mark most was not just her injuries. The bear's swollen belly told another story. She was pregnant. Mark's mind raced through his years of training. Every protocol, every safety measure, every wildlife handling procedure flooded his thoughts. The pit, about 15 feet deep, had crumbling walls that showed signs of recent collapse. The bear must have walked over the weakened ground, causing it to give way beneath her weight. Her attempts to climb out had only caused more soil to fall, making her situation worse. Pulling out his radio, Mark called for backup. "Base, this is Stevens. I have an injured pregnant grizzly trapped in an old mining pit near Sector 7, requesting immediate assistance and veterinary support." The response came through crackling static. Help would take at least 2 hours to arrive. Looking at the bear's condition, Mark knew she might not have that long. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky as Mark assessed the situation. The bear's breathing had become more labored and her movements more sluggish. Her eyes, though filled with wild fear, showed signs of exhaustion. Every minute that passed increased the risk to both her and her unborn cubs. Making a decision that went against every safety protocol, Mark began unpacking his emergency rescue gear from his truck. He had basic medical supplies, strong ropes, and a tranquilizer gun with a single dart. The tranquilizer was meant for smaller animals, but it might help calm her enough for rescue without putting her pregnancy at risk. Working quickly but cautiously, Mark secured his ropes to his truck and several sturdy trees. He created a pulley system that could help lift the bear once she was calm enough. The biggest challenge would be getting close enough to use the tranquilizer without becoming a target for her natural defenses. Standing at the pit's edge, Mark took careful aim with the tranquilizer gun. The bear's eyes met his, and in that moment, something passed between them. It was as if she understood his intent. The dart found its mark in her shoulder, and Mark watched as her movements became less frantic, though she remained conscious. Time was critical now. Mark lowered himself into the pit, his heart pounding against his ribs. The bear watched him, her eyes heavy but alert. Speaking in low, soothing tones, he approached her massive form. Years of experience had taught him that animals could sense fear, but they could also sense compassion. Using his emergency medical training, Mark quickly examined her injuries. The fall had caused several cuts and bruises, but amazingly, nothing appeared broken. The biggest danger was the stress on her pregnancy and the risk of dehydration. He provided water from his canteen, watching in amazement as she accepted this help, perhaps driven by her desperate situation. The next part required all his strength and courage. Working with trembling hands but determined focus, Mark secured the rescue harness around her body. The bear remained surprisingly cooperative, as if understanding this was her only chance at survival. Using the pulley system and his truck's power, Mark began the delicate process of lifting her from the pit. The rescue operation seemed to last forever, though it was probably no more than 30 minutes. Every creak of the rope, every movement of the bear, sent waves of anxiety through Mark's body. Finally, with one last effort, the bear was pulled to safety, rolling gently onto solid ground. Mark quickly climbed out after her, maintaining a safe distance as the tranquilizer began wearing off. The bear rose unsteadily to her feet, shaking off the dirt and confusion. She turned to look at Mark, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again. There was something in that gaze that would stay with him forever. Then slowly, and with remarkable grace for her size and condition, she limped toward the safety of the forest. As Mark watched her disappear into the undergrowth, his radio crackled with the arrival announcement of the backup team. He smiled, knowing that sometimes the most important moments in life required breaking a few rules. The memory of those intelligent eyes and the silent connection they shared would remain with him, though he never expected to see her again. The days following the rescue weighed heavily on Mark Stevens. Every night, as he sat in his modest ranger cabin filing reports, his mind wandered back to those intense moments with the pregnant bear. Protocol dictated that he should have waited for the rescue team, yet something about her situation had demanded immediate action. The thought of what might have happened if he had followed standard procedure haunted him. Mark spent hours documenting every detail of the encounter in his personal journal. The bear's injuries, though not life-threatening, could have become serious if left untreated. The cuts along her side had been deep enough to require attention, and the stress of being trapped could have threatened her pregnancy. He sketched her distinctive markings, a habit from his wildlife biology training days, noting the unique patch of lighter fur near her right shoulder that set her apart from other grizzlies in the area. Professional consequences loomed over his decision. His supervisor had called a meeting to discuss his reckless behavior. 20 years of spotless service record meant little when weighed against the risks he had taken. Yet as Mark sat in that office defending his actions, he spoke with quiet conviction about the responsibility they held as stewards of the wilderness. In the following weeks, Mark increased his patrols in the area where he had last seen the bear. Each morning, he checked for signs, tracks, or markings that might indicate her presence. The autumn weather was turning colder, and he knew bears would soon begin preparing for winter hibernation. His greatest concern was whether she would find a suitable den in her condition. Local wildlife cameras occasionally captured images of bears, but none showed his rescue subject. Mark found himself studying each photograph intently, looking for that distinctive light patch of fur. He kept these observations to himself, knowing his colleagues already thought he was too invested in this single animal. During his patrols, Mark began leaving small offerings of honey and berries near where he had found her. It wasn't standard practice, and he knew it carried risks of creating dependency, but his instincts told him she needed the extra nourishment for her pregnancy. He carefully monitored the food sites, ensuring no other animals became habituated to human assistance. As winter approached, signs of bear activity decreased across his patrol area. Mark found himself standing at the edge of that mining pit more often than he cared to admit. The rescue equipment he had used still lay stored in his truck, a reminder of that extraordinary morning. Snow began to dust the ground, and Mark knew that somewhere in these vast woods, the bear would be settling into hibernation. His last patrol of the season brought him past the old mining pit once more. Fresh snow had smoothed over any traces of the dramatic rescue, but Mark would never forget. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, half buried in the fresh powder. Bending down, he discovered a clear bear track, larger than average, with a distinctive pattern he had come to know well. She had passed through, perhaps marking her own memory of their shared experience. That evening, sitting by his cabin window, watching the snow fall, Mark reflected on the changes this encounter had brought to his life. The trust that had formed in those desperate moments challenged everything he had been taught about wild animals. Yet it also confirmed what he had always felt in his heart about the deep connections possible between humans and wildlife, when approached with respect and compassion. As seasons cycled through the Montana wilderness, the forest underwent its eternal transformation. Spring arrived with a burst of new life, painting the landscape in vibrant greens and bringing forth fresh opportunities for Mark to search for signs of the bear he had rescued. The melting snow revealed new paths and possibilities, and every morning brought renewed hope of discovering her whereabouts. Mark maintained his regular patrol routes, but always found reasons to circle back to the areas where grizzlies typically emerge from hibernation. His trained eyes scanned for distinctive tracks, broken branches, or any sign that might indicate her survival through the harsh winter months. The memory of her pregnant form and those intelligent eyes remained vivid in his mind, driving his persistent search. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing with it increased bear activity throughout the forest. Reports flowed in from various sectors of his territory. Fellow rangers documented numerous grizzly sightings, each one sending a spark of anticipation through Mark. He carefully logged every detail, cross-referencing locations and descriptions against his knowledge of the bear he had saved. One particularly promising report came from Ranger Sarah Collins in the northern sector. She had spotted a female grizzly with distinctive lighter fur patches, though she couldn't confirm if it was the same bear from the rescue. The description matched, but the bear had been too far away for positive identification. Mark spent 3 days searching that area, finding only old tracks and scattered evidence of foraging. As summer progressed, tourist sightings of bears increased. Mark found himself explaining proper bear safety protocols to visitors, while secretly hoping their photos might reveal his rescued bear. Each blurry photograph and excited tourist story added another piece to the puzzle of bear movements throughout his territory, but none provided the confirmation he sought. The autumn months painted the forest in rich golds and reds, marking almost a full year since the rescue. Mark noticed changes in bear behavior as they began preparing for winter once again. Their feeding patterns intensified, and signs of their presence became more frequent as they searched for final meals before hibernation. During this time, Mark received an unexpected visit from Dr. Helena Martinez, a wildlife biologist studying grizzly bear populations in the area. She shared data about successful bear pregnancies that season, including reports of new cubs throughout the territory. Though none could be definitively linked to his rescued bear, the information gave him hope that she might have successfully delivered her cubs. The anniversary of the rescue approached as winter's first snow dusted the mountaintops. Mark stood at the edge of the now snow-covered mining pit, remembering the intensity of that morning 1 year ago. The pit had partially filled in with soil and vegetation, nature gradually reclaiming the scar in the earth, much like the healing he hoped had come to the bear he had saved. That evening, reviewing his year's worth of patrol logs, Mark realized how this single event had shaped his daily life. Every patrol, every bear sighting, every track in the mud had carried the possibility of reconnection. Though he had not found definitive proof of her survival, the forest had taught him patience. Nature operated on its own timeline, revealing its secrets only when ready. The first year closed with the forest deep in winter's embrace. As Mark completed his final patrol of the season, he felt a deep sense of connection to this vast wilderness and its inhabitants. Somewhere out there, he believed, the bear he had rescued was sheltering through another winter, perhaps with cubs of her own. The thought brought him comfort as he prepared for another season of watching, waiting, and protecting the wild creatures under his care. The second year dawned with renewed purpose in Mark Stevens' life. Winter's grip began loosening on the Montana wilderness, and with each passing day, his anticipation grew. The approaching spring would mark the beginning of his 17th year as a forest ranger, but more significantly, it brought him closer to the 2-year anniversary of the pregnant bear's rescue. February's patrol reports showed increasing wildlife activity as the temperatures gradually rose. Mark noticed more tracks in the melting snow, signs of animals emerging from their winter slumber. His expertise in tracking had sharpened over the past year, driven by his constant search for one particular set of prints. Every bear track he encountered told a story, but none belonged to the bear that occupied his thoughts. March brought the first major changes to the forest. The snow retreated, revealing tender shoots of new grass pushing through the thawing earth. Mark observed fresh bear activity in the lower elevations, where food sources first became available. He documented 5 different adult bears in his sector alone, each with their own distinctive markings and patterns. One large male had started frequenting the eastern ridges, while 2 younger bears established territories near the old-growth forest. As spring fully embraced the wilderness, Mark witnessed nature's remarkable renewal. Wildflowers carpeted the forest floor, their colors creating a vibrant tapestry beneath the towering pines. Bird songs filled the air as migratory species returned, and the first bear cubs of the season were spotted with their mothers in neighboring sectors. Each sighting of a mother bear with cubs made Mark wonder about the pregnant bear he had rescued. The wildlife cameras stationed throughout his territory captured increasing bear activity. Mark spent extra hours reviewing the footage, studying each frame carefully. A particularly interesting sequence showed a female bear teaching her cubs to forage, their clumsy attempts at mimicking their mother bringing a smile to his face. Though it wasn't his rescued bear, The scene reminded him of why he had chosen this life of service to wildlife. By late spring, reports of bear encounters increased significantly. Tourists began sharing photos and videos of their wildlife sightings, and Mark found himself examining each one. His colleagues noticed his continued interest, but had grown to understand his dedication. They started referring to him as the Bear Whisperer, a nickname he accepted with quiet humility. Summer approached with its usual burst of activity. Mark expanded his patrol routes, covering more territory in hopes of finding signs of his rescued bear. The forest had changed since that fateful morning 2 years ago. The old mining pit where he had found her had completely transformed, now filled with vegetation and serving as a natural water catchment during spring rains. Nature had healed this wound in the earth, just as he hoped time had healed the bear's injuries. During one particularly memorable patrol, Mark discovered fresh bear tracks near a mountain stream. The prints were large, indicating an adult female, and showed the distinctive walking pattern he had come to associate with his rescued bear. Following the tracks led him to a clearing where signs of recent foraging activity were evident. Berry bushes had been stripped clean, and overturned rocks showed where a bear had searched for insects. Though he couldn't confirm it was her, the familiar pattern of movement gave him hope. As the second anniversary of the rescue drew closer, Mark noticed subtle changes in the forest rhythm. Bear sightings became more frequent, and their behaviors suggested they were establishing new territories. The abundance of spring foods had brought more bears into his sector than usual, creating a complex web of animal movements and interactions that he carefully monitored. One evening, as Mark sat completing his daily logs, he reflected on how this search had transformed his approach to his work. His connection to the forest and its inhabitants had deepened, becoming more personal and meaningful. The regular patrols were no longer just about maintaining order in the wilderness. They had become a journey of discovery and hope. The approaching anniversary filled Mark with a mixture of anticipation and acceptance. 2 years was a long time in the wild, where survival depended on countless factors beyond human control. Yet something in his ranger's instinct told him to remain patient. The forest had its own way of bringing things full circle, and he had learned to trust its timing. The morning of the rescue's second anniversary began like any other for Mark Stevens. The June sun painted the Montana sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as he started his morning patrol. Something felt different about this day, though he couldn't explain why. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a moment that had been 2 years in the making. Mark parked his truck near the rehabilitated mining pit, now a thriving part of the forest ecosystem. The morning dew still clung to the grass as he began his routine inspection of the area. The sound of birds filled the air, their songs suddenly falling silent as a larger presence made itself known in the surrounding wilderness. Through the morning mist, a movement caught his attention. At first, it appeared to be just another shadow among the trees, but Mark's experienced eyes recognized the distinctive gait of a large grizzly bear. His heart began to race as the figure emerged more clearly from the forest's edge. The bear moved with deliberate grace, and as she stepped into a patch of sunlight, Mark's breath caught in his throat. There, not 50 yards away, stood a magnificent female grizzly. Her fur gleamed in the morning light, and the distinctive patch of lighter fur near her right shoulder, the marking he had documented so carefully 2 years ago, was unmistakable. She was larger now, her form powerful and healthy, showing no signs of the injuries that had brought them together that fateful morning. Mark remained perfectly still, his years of training taking over despite the emotion welling up inside him. The bear paused, lifting her head to scent the air. Their eyes met across the clearing, and in that moment, Mark saw recognition in her gaze. It was the same intelligent look he remembered from the rescue, now filled with a calm confidence rather than desperate fear. But she wasn't alone. A slight rustling in the undergrowth behind her revealed what Mark had hoped to see. 2 small cubs, their fur a lighter shade than their mother's, tumbled into view. They were roughly 4 months old, born during the winter hibernation, and full of the clumsy energy that marked healthy young bears. The cubs stayed close to their mother, learning about their world through her example. One cub, slightly larger than its sibling, stood on its hind legs to better observe Mark. The other remained partially hidden behind its mother's bulk, peeking out with curious eyes. Their mother remained calm, showing no signs of the aggression typically associated with female bears protecting their young. Instead of retreating or displaying defensive behavior, she began a slow, deliberate walk toward the area where Mark stood. Her movements were purposeful but unthreatening, each step seemingly calculated. The cubs followed, mimicking their mother's careful approach. Mark's training screamed at him to retreat to his truck, but something stronger held him in place. The family group moved closer, stopping at a distance that both respected Mark's space and maintained their safety. The mother bear sat on her haunches, a position that spoke of comfort rather than aggression. Her cubs, taking cues from her relaxed demeanor, began exploring the immediate area while staying within the safety zone she had established. Mark watched in amazement as the cubs played near their mother, occasionally glancing in his direction with innocent curiosity. Their antics, tumbling over each other and investigating nearby plants, displayed all the hallmarks of healthy, well-nurtured bear cubs. The mother's success in raising them was evident in their glossy fur and robust energy. Time seemed to stand still in this extraordinary moment. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the clearing and illuminating the scene with golden light. The mother bear maintained her position, occasionally glancing at her cubs, but keeping her primary attention on Mark. There was something in her demeanor that seemed to convey gratitude, though Mark knew better than to anthropomorphize wild animals. The larger cub, emboldened by its mother's calm, ventured slightly closer to Mark. The mother made a soft sound, not a growl but a gentle vocalization that brought the cub back to her side. It was a perfect demonstration of the delicate balance she maintained, teaching her cubs about their world while ensuring their safety. For nearly an hour, this remarkable scene continued. The bears remained in the clearing, the cubs playing and exploring, while their mother maintained her peaceful vigil. Mark stood rooted to his spot, understanding that he was witnessing something extraordinary in the annals of wildlife behavior. His rescue of the pregnant bear had not only saved her life, but had enabled the creation of new life, now thriving under her care. As the morning wore on, the mother bear finally rose from her position. With gentle movements, she gathered her cubs, who immediately responded to her guidance. She took one last look at Mark, their eyes meeting in a moment of connection that transcended the natural barriers between human and wild animal. Then, with the same deliberate grace that had marked her arrival, she led her family back into the forest. Mark remained in the clearing long after they had disappeared, processing what he had witnessed. The event defied conventional wildlife behavior, yet it had unfolded with a natural harmony that felt right. In his years as a ranger, he had never experienced such a profound connection with a wild animal, let alone one that had returned to share its success with him. As he finally turned to walk back to his truck, Mark felt a deep sense of completion. The circle that had begun 2 years ago, with a desperate rescue, had closed in the most beautiful way possible. The forest had given him a gift, showing that sometimes, when humans act with compassion and respect, nature responds in kind. In the weeks following the remarkable reunion, Mark Stevens experienced a profound shift in his understanding of wildlife behavior. The encounter with the mother bear and her cubs had challenged everything he thought he knew about these magnificent creatures. The memory of their peaceful interaction remained vivid in his mind, a testimony to nature's capacity for extraordinary connections. News of the encounter spread through the ranger station, drawing both amazement and skepticism from his colleagues. Mark carefully documented every detail of the interaction in his official reports, though he knew some aspects of the experience defied conventional wildlife behavior patterns. The bear's deliberate approach, her calm demeanor with cubs present, and the apparent recognition she showed were unprecedented in recorded grizzly behavior. During his regular patrols, Mark began noticing signs of the family group in his sector. Fresh tracks told stories of their movements, showing how the mother bear was teaching her cubs to forage. He discovered areas where they had dug for roots, overturned logs for insects, and picked berries from laden bushes. The cubs' smaller tracks alongside their mother's larger prints painted a picture of successful parenting in the wild. One morning, Mark found evidence of their nighttime activities near his regular observation post. The cubs had apparently engaged in playful behavior, their tracks showing where they had chased each other around trees and rolled in soft earth. Their mother's prints revealed how she had kept a watchful perimeter around their play area, her protective instincts perfectly balanced with allowing her cubs to explore and learn. The impact of this unique relationship extended beyond Mark's professional life. His evening routine now included lengthy journal entries, recording not just observations, but his reflections on the deeper meaning of this extraordinary bond. He wrote about the trust the mother bear displayed, how she seemed to remember the help she had received in her moment of need, and the way she was teaching her cubs that not all human encounters were threats. Other rangers began reporting unusual bear behavior in their sectors. The mother and cubs maintained a noticeable but peaceful presence in the forest. Unlike other grizzly families that typically avoided human activity altogether, this group showed a remarkable ability to coexist while maintaining a safe and respectful distance. Their behavior became a topic of interest for wildlife researchers studying bear social dynamics. Mark observed how the cubs were growing, their personalities becoming more distinct with each sighting. The more adventurous cub often led their explorations, while its siblings showed a more cautious but equally curious nature. Their mother's patient guidance was evident in how they responded to various situations, learning the complex skills needed for survival in the wild. The presence of this bear family changed the dynamics of the entire forest sector. Other wildlife seemed to respond differently when they were nearby. Deer showed less anxiety, smaller animals continued their activities, and there was a noticeable harmony in these interactions. It was as if the mother bear's peaceful demeanor influenced the entire ecosystem. During one memorable morning patrol, Mark witnessed the mother bear teaching her cubs to fish in a mountain stream. Her technique was precise, demonstrating the patience and skill needed to catch the spawning trout. The cubs watched intently, making their own clumsy attempts that gradually became more coordinated. What struck Mark most was how the mother would occasionally glance in his direction, seemingly sharing this teaching moment with him. The experience had a lasting effect on Mark's approach to wildlife management. His reports began incorporating observations about animal behavior that went beyond traditional data points. He noted the subtle interactions, the learning processes, and the complex social behaviors that weren't typically documented in standard wildlife reports. His superiors noticed this change, recognizing the value of these deeper insights into wildlife behavior. As summer progressed, Mark found himself becoming an unwitting expert on bear behavior. Other rangers sought his advice on handling bear encounters, and his experience with the mother bear and her cubs provided valuable insights into peaceful human-wildlife coexistence. The story of their unique bond became a powerful tool for teaching visitors about respecting wildlife while maintaining safe distances. The impact of this extraordinary relationship extended to the local community as well. Mark's observations helped shape new guidelines for wildlife interaction, emphasizing the possibility of peaceful coexistence when humans showed proper respect and understanding. The bear family became symbols of successful conservation, demonstrating how human compassion could positively influence wildlife behavior without compromising their wild nature. Yet Mark was careful to maintain professional boundaries despite the unique connection. He never attempted to approach the bears closely or interfere with their natural behaviors. His role remained that of a respectful observer, privileged to witness this remarkable example of trust between species. This balance became a model for other wildlife professionals studying human-animal interactions. As autumn approached, bringing changes to the forest once again, Mark reflected on how this experience had transformed his life's work. The rescue of a pregnant bear 2 years ago had not just saved her life, but had opened a window into understanding wildlife behavior that challenged conventional wisdom. The trust she showed by returning with her cubs and their continued peaceful presence in his sector represented something profound about the potential for harmony between humans and wild animals. The unique bond formed between a forest ranger and a grizzly bear family became more than just an extraordinary tale. It stood as testament to the complex intelligence of these magnificent creatures and their capacity for memory, trust, and peaceful interaction when treated with respect and compassion. For Mark Stevens, it was living proof that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from moments when we choose to help, even against all conventional wisdom. Experience more extraordinary stories of wildlife encounters that will touch your heart and change how you see the natural world. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to unlock weekly tales of remarkable animal encounters, rescue missions, and moments that bridge the gap between humans and wildlife.